Everybody, I'm Missi Matthews. Welcome inside the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex and happy April. We are officially in the month of the 2022 NFL Draft. And to talk all things draft with us today, Matt Williamson of Steelers Nation Radio, kind enough to join me. And Matt, quarterbacks are always going to be the hot topic. Every single draft, I think, for Pittsburgh Steelers fans, you have a little bit more of a interest in it this year with Ben Roethlisberger retiring. Just overall, the quarterback draft class, how has it changed or not changed since the combine up to this point with pro days almost being over?
See, I think it's a really interesting class that's kind of getting a bad rap, to be honest with you. I mean, there's not an Andrew Luck. There's not a Trevor Lawrence. It's going to be the first pick overall in any draft that they come out. But people forget, Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, those guys were not super early picks and had massive questions surrounding them when they came out of school. I mean, some of them small schools, unorthodox quarterbacks. I'm not sure that those guys who are massive successes, MVP types, had fewer holes in their game at the same stage as some of these quarterbacks. And each one of these guys, and I think there's 5 of them, maybe Carson Strong makes 6, but he's a certain type, are future starters to some degree. That doesn't mean they're all going to be successes, and they each have a major question. But so did Josh Allen. He had major accuracy issues. Lamar Jackson's style of play was very different. Mahomes was a wild card in terms of risk takers. So I think it's not as terrible a group as everybody makes it out to be.
Do you think anything has changed in terms of maybe how teams would be ranking them at this point because of pro days?
Maybe, and I'm not dancing around the question, but I'm really having a tough time getting a real barometer of what the league thinks of this group. I mean, how early can these guys go? Because there's not as many landing spots as there usually is. And part of that's because 5 of them went in the top 15 last year. So a lot of the teams, the Jets, the Patriots, they have their young guy to build around. There was a ton of quarterback movement, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, of course, that filled holes immediately. So the musical chairs aren't quite as open as usual. And there's several teams in the Steelers boat that have guys, but could use a guy, but don't have to.
How do you see it playing out in terms of how many would potentially go in the first round?
I would put the over-under at 3 and maybe even 4, because I think what's going to happen is Pickett and Willis will go reasonably early, maybe before the Steelers even have a shot at either at 20. And I think it gets really interesting. I mentioned Lamar Jackson earlier. Lamar Jackson was a very late first-round pick by a team coming up from the second round to get in the first round to get that 5th-year option, which is the real value of these guys. So I think the Ritters, the Howes, Corral, I think they're going to get really hot and exciting near the end of the first round, maybe for teams that passed on them early to get back in. And that's a big key, and it's also a big Steeler key, is if you can have quality, it doesn't have to be superstar, quarterback play for 5 cost control years. I always use the Javon Hargrave example that the Steelers would never have lost Javon Hargrave or Matt Filer, because the quarterback is such a cost controlled entity there on a rookie deal.
In terms of the Steelers, if you're the GM, you have the 20th overall pick and you want to go quarterback, who would you be taking?
Willis is my favorite, and I realize there's a lot of work to do there. But, Missi, I actually think landing spot is as important as who the actual player is. Dwayne Haskins is a perfect example. He really was not given much of an opportunity to succeed in his first stint. And not that he played great, I'm not excusing it. But I feel like this is a very good landing spot for whoever it is. Trubisky can hold down the 4. Rudolph can hold down the 4. You're trying to develop a running game. There's a defense. More importantly, there's a high quality coaching staff and culture in place. You're not going to be asked to do everything. And to me, that fits really well with Willis, who to me certainly has the highest ceiling, the most gifts, but he's got the most work to do as well. I'm a little infatuated with Desmond Ridder too. I like Ridder a lot.
All right, if quarterback's off the table at 20, you're still the Steelers GM, Matt. What other position would you be going after with that pick?
In typical Kevin Colbert fashion, he's set this team up really well that if it's not A, it's B. That's bad business. You know, Kevin is so good at fielding a quality squad through free agency and not saying that allows him to go in a lot of different directions throughout the draft. I think it's one of his greatest strengths as a team builder. He doesn't pigeonhole himself into, they better take a defensive tackle or they're doomed. You know, so the two positions that stand out to me most, though, are a safety. And the more work I've done on this safety class, the more I like 7 or 8 players that I think would be great additions. Is 20 too early for one? That's a good question. The second round might be the sweet spot for that, or trading down to 28 or something along those lines. And it seems a little bit like a luxury, but I think wide receiver is exactly what the doctor ordered, especially to make Trubisky, Rudolph, quarterback to be named later, to make their life easier. If you can have 3 high-end receivers and trot out Claypool, Deontay, Freiermuth, Najee, and a first-round pick receiver, those 5 on the field together for a high percentage of snaps, sure makes life tough on a defense.
In terms of filling some of the Steelers' needs, as you said, Kevin Colbert went into this draft working through free agency, saying that, you know, they have almost every spot filled in terms of having somebody who is starter capable. What group is, you know, deep, or some group that would work well with what the Steelers need to do in this draft?
Yeah, real quick. I mean, not that I'm contradicting what Kevin said, but I do think strong safety doesn't currently have a starter, and third receiver doesn't have a starter. People don't think of the third receiver as a starter, but only the Rams and Bengals played more 11 personnel than the Steelers last year. So they have 3 receivers on the field, you know, 70-80% of the time. So that's a starter to me, and I'm sure they'll be addressed draft or free agency. I mentioned the safety class. Again, the more I look at it, the more I like it. As always, there's tons of receivers. I mean, every year, 10 to 12 starter caliber guys enter the league. And it used to be, you know, 3rd-year breakout receivers. That doesn't exist anymore. They come in the league so NFL ready. The deepest position in the draft is the edge pass rushers, which the Steelers probably won't be in the early round market for. But I think Steeler fans should be rooting for those guys to fall off the board before the Steelers pick. And there could be quite a few that do.
All right, lastly for you, whose stock is on the rise, whose stock is falling? You can give me players or position groups.
Stingley from LSU just a day or two ago ran a blazing time, and we haven't heard much from him at all. He's an ultra-talented corner that missed some time with injuries and some COVID things. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I remember him, and that he's unbelievably talented. A couple of the corners, him and Sauce Gardner, McDuffie, I think all those guys are really on the rise. Jordan Davis has to be mentioned as just an absolute freak of nature, as a huge human being, defensive tackle from Georgia. That's an interesting question, because they're on the rise to me and you. The people upstairs in the building, they knew what these guys were, you know, 6 months ago. There's no surprises for that.
All right, Matt, thanks for your time. As always, I'm sure we'll chat much more as we get closer and closer to the draft. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It was fun.
All right, thanks to Matt for joining me today. We do want to let you know that the NFL has announced the off-season dates for all 32 teams, and here's a look at the Steelers. The first day for OTAs, this is phase 1, April 18th. This is just strength and conditioning, getting into the weight room. Players will be back in the building. And then the 10 OTA workouts, you see the dates there in May and June, and then mandatory minicamp from June 14th through 16th. So it'll be good to see a lot of the new free agents and also familiar faces back in the building. And of course, we'll have tons of coverage for you on Steelers.com and the official Steelers YouTube page. That's going to do it for this edition of Steelers Live. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next time.